what's one challenge or shift you're currently navigating in your organization or the sector? And how are you approaching it? Or what kind of support would help?
I think the biggest challenge is to figure out what is the right model in terms of funding. I think what I say to a lot of people is when I was young and naive in my career, I used to believe there is poverty because there's not enough money to spread around the world to support people. And I think I've come to realize that money is not an issue. There's plenty of money around the world that's being generated. The issue is not the money. The issue is finding the will to do this and finding the right model. Because a lot of people are asking, if you look at the aid system in the last 20 years, it hasn't worked because we've poured in billions of dollars and yet we still have those complexities. And people are like, what's going on? So people are starting to rethink, okay, maybe we need to do things differently. And I think the biggest challenge in the sector is how do we do things differently moving forward? It's not about how much money do we need. It's like, how do we invest the right money in the right approach for the right goals? How do we make this more intentional and more curious? So when I go to conferences, I always ask that question to panel speaker. What are you thinking? What have you tried differently in the last year that was totally out of the box for you that you wanted to test? And what have you learned from that, basically? I always try to do that. And I think it's interesting that it always takes people by surprise because they never prepare for that type of question. I know this. But they always have come up with something. I think it forces people to rethink, to really think about. And what I try to do is I try to tell people, please share your failures. Don't be tell us what mistakes you made in the past that you look back now and we didn't do this right. We had right intentions, right thought, but then when you look back at it, it wasn't the right way to do this. We could have done this differently. And I think that as a sector, it's important to be open about this because you know how it is. In the sector, we all want to look good, of course. So we talk about our wins all the time, but I think it's also very courageous to go out and say, listen, this is what we tried. And Acumen, as an organization, I'm inspired by it because they did that 2 years ago. They released a report about all the mistakes they made as an organization. And they said it was their responsibility because we don't want people to keep making the same mistakes. If we are all transparent about it, because what you sometimes tend to realize that people making the same mistakes because nobody's open about it, that you shouldn't do it this way. If you're open about it, hopefully as a sector, we actually learn from each other and we actually innovate it. I think that's one of the biggest challenges for people to own up their mistakes and their failures or even share their lessons. Here's what we learned from what we tried, basically. And I think it's going to help a lot if we could start doing that. And I think one inspiration I recently saw is that I went to a conference and I saw one NGO doing that. As an example of somebody trying to do this differently is Save the Children, which is a very well-known institution around the world who have their model of aid service delivery to help the health of children, which is very noble. But what they've tried to do now is to set up a different entity, which is called Save the Children Global Ventures, with a different approach. It's basically using philanthropic funds, but now towards social enterprise. So they're looking for social entrepreneurs that are helping children's health. So they want to focus on doing it that way rather than doing service delivery. What's interesting is I met some of the people there. They said what's interesting when you try something different like this, you actually get access to new types of funders that you never had access to. That also challenges you, makes you think differently. How can we do this differently?